Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
To listen without ads, head over to patreon.com/rightandwrong.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
so some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by a best-selling writer of both historical fiction and thrillers. It's Nuala Ellwood a.k.a. Iris Costello. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. Let's start, as we often do, with the latest publication, The Story Collector, as Iris Costello. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, well, The Story Collector is, it's historical fiction, and it is set across 3 timelines. So we have the London of 1915, where we're introduced to Katerina, who's a tarot reader, and she is hiding quite a dark secret behind the quite magical world that she's created in her bakery in the centre of London. We're also taken to a German prisoner of war camp in 1918, where there's based on true life. This is actually, I'll discuss a little bit later, but there's a linguistics project taking place here, and we have Miriam, who has been introduced to a mysterious mute British soldier, and kind of tying all these stories together, we have the present day story of Edie, who is a recently widowed artist who buys a cottage in Cornwall, and as she's renovating it, she discovers a mysterious box hidden in the wall that contains a set of tarot cards and a vinyl record and a black and white photograph. And as she starts to dig and investigate the contents of this box, she finds that the secrets that she uncovers are very close to home and close to her own family life. And we find kind of all these mysteries of the ages all coming together towards the end. And all 3 of the stories are about preserving voices and stories, hence the title, The Story Collector. And that's my way of kind of describing it without giving away too many spoilers, which is always very difficult. But that's it in a nutshell.
Well, that was perfect. You're clearly well practiced at doing these little blurbs without doing any spoilers. You mentioned that there was a sort of backstory to this linguistics part of it. I was going to ask, when you're running across 3 different timelines, 3 different characters, where do you get the kind of inspiration for something as sort of far-reaching as this?
It's strange, really, when you're writing novels, because sometimes an idea that you've had years ago will suddenly come and be very relevant to something that you're working on years later. And for me, the kind of germ of the idea for The Story Collector came probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I was listening to, there's a BBC4 documentary called How the Edwardians Spoke. And it was really interesting. I've always been fascinated with that period of history, World War I and the fiction and poetry related to that. And they talked about a linguistics project that took place in German prisoner of war camps during World War I. And it was 2 linguistics professors, Durgan and Brandl, who were working as part of the German Phonographic Commission. They'd been working on this project, recording the voices of ordinary people. And then, of course, as war broke out, all of the academic projects were put on hold. And as they were kind of working out what to do next, they realized that within these prisoner of war camps, there was a ready, a group of people waiting to be recorded, really, as in the prisoners, the British prisoners. And so they carried on with this project, and they recorded the British soldiers usually reciting extracts from the Bible, and the aim was to take the recordings home when after the war and to analyze them in a linguistics sense, for dialect and what have you. And a lot of those dialects, the British dialects, had actually become obsolete over the course of history. But for me, as a novelist, as I was listening to this, it just started to kind of bring some ideas to mind. I was thinking, what would happen if you were to stumble across one of these recordings, and what when you hear a disembodied voice, you automatically, or I do at least, start to piece together a story behind that voice. Who was it, and why were they there? And particularly when you're reciting a piece from the Bible, because it's quite stark, and you're not getting a sense of the person behind that. So for me, in the story collector, what I wanted to do here was to kind of give faces and character to those disembodied voices within that section of the novel in the prisoner of war camp. And also from a wider perspective, once I brought in my other characters and the other storylines, which incorporated tarot, which again was something that had a bit of a resurgence during the war years, where you have bereaved families trying to find, some sense of closure, and contacting psychics and mediums and consulting the tarot cards. And I thought, what joy, kind of unites all of this is this sense of a voice. We're trying to hear and connect with people through the voice. So it kind of all blossomed really from that one program.
Yeah.
And that's, as I said, that's the thing for me. That's what I find so magical about writing, is that what can be just a germ of an idea can suddenly, as you start to evolve it, become something much, much bigger.
Yeah, yeah. So this book has 3 timelines that are concurrent.
Yes.
Your first book as Iris Costello, The Secrets of Rochester Place, that spanned across 2 timelines, right?
That's right, yes, yeah.
Was it always your intention to have multiple timelines in this book, even kind of from the early inception?
I think so, yes. I think with my historical novels are mainly really kind of time slips. So you have a present day protagonist, usually investigating something that pertains to the past. So rather than it just being purely in one timeline, in, for example, 1915, purely past, you've got the past and the present, which is quite nice actually, because then you get to explore a contemporary voice and the historical voice within one novel. But with the 3 strands, it becomes a little bit more complicated, because at first I was going to just have a 2 strand as I'd had with Rochester Place. But then I realized that the story of Miriam and Katerina, who are the 2 past characters, were so strong in themselves. And then to have these 3 very strong female protagonists, I thought it's going to really work to have 3 strands. But in doing that, you almost have to, then it becomes quite complex, and you're weaving together a lot of different voices and timelines and characters. But it was a challenge, but I think it needed to have that, and it's all the better for it, I think, to have the 3.
Yeah, it's definitely giving yourself more to kind of make sure it all lines up in terms of like the pacing of the story, like as it's read.
Definitely.
They all kind of come to the peaks and troughs at the right places.
Yes.
With that added layer of complication, do you map everything out for your novels before you start writing?
I tend to now. I've written this is my 8th novel. So when I first started writing, it was very much a case of just beginning to write without any kind of plan. I'd have an idea and just see where it would take me. But now, particularly once you get published and you start working with an editor, it really helps both you and your editor to come up with not just a synopsis. I think for me, I tend to do a brief chapter plan as well. Because you have all these strands, it really helps to get some sort of order. And invariably, as the novel progresses and as you're writing, that chapter plan will alter. It's not set in stone, but you can see just by looking at it that you've got the basic structure there. And then to kind of show that to your editor so that they get a sense that there is a story here, that there is you've got the right amount of drama and climax and balance and pace. And you can see that within a chapter plan. You can describe that, even though, yes, it will change. So I do tend to do that. But then again, once you start writing it, all sorts of surprises start to happen. But you've got generally and much to my head still. What's you done now? But that's great. That's part of the process of writing. But I think to have just a basic structure in place is really helpful. You don't feel then that, because of course, if you start writing, the bulk of the novel or the first half, and then you find that actually things aren't balancing up from a timeline perspective or certain backgrounds, then you have to go back and start again. So it does help to have that structure in place, however loose it may be.
Oh, okay. And is that something that sort of over the years and several books that you've written and published now, is that something that you've kind of learned and sort of honed down?
It has, yes, definitely. And I think also another aspect of being published, as opposed to when you're a first time novelist and you're at the point where you're writing a novel to pitch for the first time, is that once you're published, you then have deadlines. So you have to work to a certain, kind of time frame. And I think having some kind of structure or some sort of chapter plan or plan in place can help from that perspective as well. So you can kind of look at it and see, right, okay, I can have such and such amounts completed by this date and what have you. So it gives you that sense, but it is something that I have learned and acquired over the process, the period, definitely.
Yes, we're always, I think writing like any craft, the more you do it, you're always learning, and the more you do it, the more you learn.
Absolutely. We're
always getting better.
Definitely.
Speaking of publishing, this is the second book by Iris Costello, but under your given name, Nuala Ellwood, you have published many more books than this, multiple best-selling thrillers. Was historical fiction something that you'd always been wanting to branch into?
It is, yes. I mean, growing up and as a teenager, the books that I loved were mainly historical fiction, really. As I said, I've always had a fascination with Edwardian fiction. And Pat Barker, who wrote the Regeneration trilogy, was a huge inspiration for me. And so it was a case of really, but then again, I also love thrillers, and I love this writing contemporary fiction and the drama and that kind of thing. So within my novels, there is a semblance within the thrillers. There is a semblance of the historical element to some of them, but I wanted to kind of go a little bit further and have it be purely historical. And I thought to do that would probably mean a pen name, because I think it gives you much more sense of these are the thrillers and Nuala Ellwood thrillers, and these the Iris Costello historical fiction. But yes, I've always loved historical fiction. I'm really enjoying writing these. It's been wonderful. I'm a real history buff and I love the research element as well. This is where I have to really be, again, talking about starting to write the novel. I could lose myself in the research process, and there comes a point where I think you have to start writing the novel now. Yeah. Start writing, put it down. But it's just so fascinating, and it's been wonderful and very different to kind of the stories that I wrote within the thrillers.
Yeah, but I imagine and just based on the way that you were kind of pitching it, and you were saying, that's my roundup without giving any spoilers, which is with thrillers, that's like every single pitch for a thriller is you trying to tell them the thing without actually telling them the thing, right?
Yeah.
Do a lot of your kind of the stuff you've learned over the years writing many thrillers, has that kind of bled into the process of writing your kind of historical fiction?
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can in the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
From a perspective of the not giving away spoilers and things like that, do you mean, or do you mean with the craft? Yes, absolutely. I mean, it gives you such a grounding, and you don't want to spoil the experience for readers either. I think we've all, as writers, seen sometimes in reviews where, you know, spoilers have been given away accidentally on kind of online reviews, and it's like, oh no. But yes, that is something that I've learned a lot from, and even just there's still the pacing of writing a thriller and can inform historical fiction also, because I would say that you know, my novels are all very much suspense, mystery, and it's learning what to hold back. You know, I was talking there about the research as well. How much of the research do you actually put in? That's, you know, the temptation is to just flood out all of the historical detail, and particularly with as I say, with this genre. So it's holding back, not just in terms of plot, and keeping people guessing, you know, at the end of each chapter, keeping, you know, the reader hooked, but also, you know, just how much of the backstory and the research to hold back on as well. And that's something that, yes, is definitely, you learn as you go, really, over time.
Yeah, I've had a few historical authors on, and there's definitely a trap with the research part of it specifically, where it's like you can really get into the weeds of it and start kind of being like, oh, but are the buckles on their shoes correct for the time?
Absolutely. When you know you're going to get a message from somebody, from a reader who will spot that as well. Definitely. And you think, so you do tend to, and of course, and with dialogue as well, certain turns of phrase and mannerisms, what have you, that just weren't used at the time. And that's very important for me, that you know, you can't, there's only so much you can do, as you say, you know, every little point can't be perfect. But also with novels, it's very cinematic, really. We are encountering these characters at a certain moment in time. It's like a snapshot into their lives. So you can't include every single detail about them either. So whereas we as the writer will know the backstory to that person,
yes,
the reader doesn't necessarily need to be privy to everything. And that's, again, something that's the redrafting process helps with that as well. I think that you know, that first draft is the chance to get everything down, including all of the historical detail. And then you get to the second draft and you think, no, you can really allow yourself to shred a lot of this and to hone it, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, speaking of backstory, I'd love to go back to a kind of earlier time in your life. Your first novel, My Sister's Bones, was published in 2016.
Yes.
One of your thrillers.
Yeah.
Was that one of the first sort of full manuscripts that you wrote, or had you written much prior to that?
Well, actually, yes, I was published before as Nuala Ellwood, and I had with Quercus. So it was My Sister's Bones was my first thriller.
Ah, okay.
And I did an MA in creative writing about 15 years ago now, and I started to write a novel called Soho 4 a.m., which was set in between the 24 hours between London winning the bid to host the 2012 Olympics and the 7/7 bombings. And I was actually living in Soho during that period and remembered that very strange 24 hours vividly, and I wanted to encapsulate it. And it followed 4 characters as they were walking through the streets of London during those 24 hours. And it was with that I approached Madeline Milburn, my agent, just after graduating from my MA. And so I had those two. They were kind of very quiet novels. They weren't thrillers. And I knew after that there was this big idea that I had that I wanted to explore. which was My Sister's Bones. It was just something I'd always been fascinated by. It was the story of a female war reporter who was suffering from PTSD, and she goes back to her hometown and she starts to see things in the garden, the next door garden of her parents' old place, and we don't know whether what she's seeing is real or a manifestation of her PTSD. And it was just something that had been, my dad was a journalist, and he'd reported from Beirut during the Civil War. We had family friends who worked in that field, and it had just fascinated me from a writing perspective, from a psychological perspective. And so yes, that was the one that I really wanted to write.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and so that was kind of the first thriller, and that was when I got my publishing deal with Penguin for that, and I'm still with them with my historical fiction. So it all began with that novel.
Oh, that's so interesting. Presumably that you were submitting to agents. It was an open submission that you submitted to Madeleine Milburn and then signed with her as your agent.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Am I right in thinking you worked with the Arts Council to help?
That's right, yeah. I spoke to Madeleine and she said, I'd really like to pitch this idea to publishers, and we were going to take it to the London Book Fair. But at that point, I just had the outline of it and the synopsis. And she said, do you think you could get a full draft written? And at that point, I thought I really need to immerse myself in this story because of the research element, looking into PTSD, particularly PTSD within war reporting. I thought I'm going to have to, really invest in this. And so there was an Arts Council funding stream at the time called Time to Write, which allowed you to, if you could apply for funding to give you the time to write your novel and to research it, to go on, field research. And so I applied, I got the funding, and I went off to Herne Bay, where the novel's set on the Kent coast, and did a lot of research and writing there, spoke to psychologists who had worked with war reporters. It was just and war reporters themselves, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to fully research a book it was just amazing. It was an amazing opportunity, and by the end of it, I had that first draft ready, and I think it shows that for me, I felt very confident with the amount of detail and research, because I think it needed that.
Yeah,
the nature of the subject matter, and on the back of that, I was signed by Katie Loftus at Penguin, and she was my first editor, and she'd fallen in love with the manuscript. We really clicked, which I think is so important when working with an editor, because you work so closely. And they have to really understand you and your work and what you're getting at, and what your motivation is. And we really did click, and that was the first of the thrillers, which was amazing.
Have you had different editors, or have you always been with the same one throughout the years?
Well, Katie left. She left Penguin, and I'm currently with Vicky Moynes, who is excellent. I've been with her since we started working together on The Perfect Life, which was my fourth thriller. And we've worked through The Secrets of Rochester Place and The Story Collector together. And she's a brilliant editor. We get on very well, and it's as I said, it's a case of both understanding each other as well when you're working so closely like that. It's really quite important to have that rapport.
Yeah, and if you can work with an editor, on multiple books, that rapport is kind of like just grows and grows and grows. And I think there's people tend to do very well when they work with the same editor over and over again.
Yes, yeah, I think so, definitely.
Before we get on to the Desert Island question, I saw that, very exciting, My Sister's Bones, which we were just talking about, your debut thriller, is being made into a film. Not only that, am I right in thinking it's now wrapped?
Yes, it's wrapped, and it's very, very exciting. I went down to, I spent one day in Whitstable, we were filming in Whitstable, and I was invited to go and watch parts of it being filmed, and that was the most incredible feeling to see. I mean, I had the headphones on, I could hear some of the dialogue, and it's just like, oh my God, it was a very familiar scene as well. And I thought that this idea that I just had one day as I was sitting at my desk is now, being acted out with Anna Friel and Jenny Seagrove, and it's like, oh my goodness. But it's very exciting. And Bill Kenwright, actually, he bought the rights to the film, and he optioned it back in 2016 when the book came out. So a long process. And I met Bill several times. He's an amazing character. He passed away sadly in October of last year. And he was just the most passionate, amazing figure anyway. But to have him, be so enthusiastic about the story was just magical. So it'll be when it comes out, it'll be a lovely tribute to him as well, which is fantastic. It's very exciting. I can't wait to see what it looks like, and amazing pinch me moment.
Surreal in some ways.
Absolutely.
Were you involved at any point, or was it they kind of took it and people worked on the adaptation and things like that, and you kind of were just there for the one day?
Naomi Gibney she wrote the script, which is fantastic, and it was actually really nice because throughout the process, I remember Bill would send copies of the script to see, what I thought, which was really lovely, and it was I felt part of it. Which was great, because I know that sometimes once it's out of your hands, that's it. And that's quite a scary thought too, because you think, oh my goodness. But it was wonderful to see, what they'd done. And there's an amazing director attached to it, Heidi Greensmith. She's a wonderful director. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see what it looks like. Definitely.
Sounds like it's in good hands.
Absolutely.
And really excited to see when it comes out.
Definitely.
That brings us to the desert island.
Right.
So, Nuala, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you hope it would be?
Well, it would have to be Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And this is quite interesting, because I thought to myself, it's a very short book, because most people would say I need to say something really, hefty to keep me going. Mm-hmm. The reason behind this is Mrs. Dalloway was the novel that made me want to write. For me, again, as I said, I have this quite nerdy obsession with that period of time. And but I've always loved Virginia Woolf, and that story for me just captures perfectly what it is to be alive. And that is really why I write in the first place. It's writing stories from being a little girl has been my way of making sense of the world. Whatever is chaotic or unpredictable in the world, I feel like when I read a book or when I'm writing a story, I can begin to make sense of it. And the timeline, it takes place over 24 hours in London. The way that it just touches upon the past and the present as such a fluid thing, for me, it's just a wonderful book. And I've read it several times, and every time I read it, I get something else from it. I discover something new, and it just kind of reinforces this belief of being glad to be alive. And I think if I was on a desert island, I would want that reminder. And I think it would be a comfort to be surrounded by these very familiar now characters of the book. So that would be my choice.
Yeah, well, I mean, you speak very passionately about it, and I have no doubts that it would be a wonderful choice. And yeah, it's nice to know that there's sort of something within reach where you can just kind of jump back in and be reminded of the good stuff and the nice things and why it all happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Great choice. And that brings us to the end of the regular episode and into the extended cut exclusive to Patreon subscribers. So anyone listening who hasn't yet joined the Patreon, please do think about it. It goes a long way towards covering the costs of running this podcast. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Nuala, for coming on the podcast and sharing all of your experiences and telling us all about your work and the writing and the books.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Really great.
The Story Collector is out now for anyone who wants to buy it as of this episode airing. And if you want to keep up with what Nuala is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at Costello Stories or on Instagram at Iris Costello Words or Nuala Writes. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow along on socials. You can get the extended episodes a week early and ad-free on Patreon. And for more bookish chat, check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Nuala and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can in the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.